Do you ever wish someone would draw you a map and give you the directions to the career of your dreams? If so, consider this podcast your GPS to a career where you feel strong, fulfilled, and passionate about your work, day in and day out. On this show, I'm sharing the tools to help you advocate for your strengths, discover your passions, and learn from folks who transform their careers for the better. My name is Joyel Crawford, your fairy god mentor. And with 18 years of experience in HR at a Fortune 50 company and 20 years of coaching and mentoring top leaders, I am thrilled to be your guide on this career journey. Let's get started. Welcome to Career View Mirror, the podcast where we reflect on stories and lessons that shape careers and leaders. I'm your host, Joyel Crawford, and today we are diving into an essential workplace topic, fostering genuine psychological safety. Joining us is Tonya Ladipo. She's a licensed clinical social worker, founder and CEO of the Ladipo Group, who specializes in helping organizations create safe, inclusive spaces where everyone can thrive. Welcome, Tonya.
Thank you, Joyel. It's really nice to be here. I'm glad to be in conversation with you.
Oh, I am just so excited to just dive deep into how you got started. Like, what was the experience that inspired you to dedicate your career to a mission of creating safe, inclusive spaces where everyone can thrive?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to start at the beginning. And I do want to say, whenever people kind of do interviews, it sounds like it all was planned out, and that was not it at all. So I do like to be really honest. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. That means I went to graduate school to become a therapist. And so that's what I did. I was a therapist for many years, working in community behavioral health agencies. And I saw a lot of people who looked like me get poor treatment. And I would say something to management and they wouldn't make any changes. Or the clients didn't look like me. And I'd say, hey, let's diversify who is coming in to get great service. We go to management. They didn't want to do anything about it. So I started out on my own, and I started as a traditional psychotherapy practice 20 years ago. And in that time, really evolved to working with people within organizations, because so many of our clients were coming to us because of the stress of work. We passed over for promotions, bullying that was extreme, but then also like the subtle ways of being excluded. And so really focused our energy in the workplace. And in hindsight, I had some horrible bosses, which I think we've all had horrible bosses. And I set out, as I grew my team, I wanted them to have a different experience of work than I had. Which there have been lessons about that too. Like sometimes you swing so far the other way, like, there's pros and cons of it all.
Right.
And then we also wanted to be in workplaces to like talk about how you really can go through the muck and come out the other side in a good way.
Right.
Beneficial for everybody.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, it's nice to know where you started, because I'm always just naturally curious, and I know you, but I don't really we never talk about our origin stories, And I was just like, what inspired you? And, I often think about the why, what is the why? What's the thing that gets you up in the morning, Tonya?
Yeah. We spend so much time at work. There are days where we spend way more time at work than we do with the people we love at home. And so what really kind of drives me is wanting to make the workplace better.
Yeah.
We have to be there, right? We have to go to work. And not every day is going to be rainbows and roses, but if we can spend our time interacting with colleagues in a way that actually brings more satisfaction for everybody, why would we want to do that?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we invest energy and time into making our working relationships as good as they can be? Because we spend so much time there.
Right. And we want the people that are working there to stay there, right? Like if you lose your employees,
Yes.
you're basically, your business is over. So
Very true. Very
you
true.
want to retain these people. I know that they always say, happy employees make happy customers, but
It's true.
the truth.
It's very true. It is very true.
So
yeah. You want to make an environment where people can thrive and where they feel a sense of comfort and belonging in their humanness. Yeah. And when you put the practices in place to make that happen,
right,
people want to stay.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You want to take away the extraness, like all the noise that's going on either outside or inside the workplace. Like, was there any particular example of something that may have happened to you personally, or maybe a story that you could share that maybe really inspired you to like kind of really focus on the psychological safety piece?
So it's funny, the first story that comes to mind is an old, 15, 17 years old story that sticks with me. It was when I was working, older than that. It's before I started my company, actually.
Ooh, okay.
So, yeah, before that. So I was working at a community mental health nonprofit agency in the mission and the work they were doing. So happy to be part of the team. And there were some things I thought that could be done differently. So I said what I thought. And I guess they weren't really liking hearing my feedback. And so when review time came, my direct supervisor gave me an exceptional review. I did great work. But when it came time for bonuses and raises, I was denied. And so I went to the assistant director and asked about it. I just got a great review from my direct supervisor. Why did I not get the raise?
Right. The math's not mathing.
The math was not mathing, and neither was her answer. As she talked to goals, and I was hot. Kept my cool in the moment, but like inside I was hot. And so I heard what she said, did not agree with it. And I think I just left. Like I'm not dramatic. Like there's no scene. I'll take this in and I'll decide, what I do with it. And later she actually did come back and give me the raise. Nothing had changed. I think I just said what needed to be said. So if I'm going to get penalized for speaking up to make the services better for the people we are paid to serve, that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
That's a huge problem, right? And so even though that was so many years ago, it stays with me because that's actually the essence of psychological safety. People think psychological safety is all about feeling comfortable and we love each other and we're the best of friends. And that is really not it at all. Psychological safety is that we can give feedback, we can share ideas without fear of retribution, punishment, or humiliation.
Very
nice. That's the definition of it. And so, yeah, personally, when and I was working in a nonprofit, I was barely making any money, and you're not going to give me this little bit of a raise because you didn't like that I said something? No.
To help the business. To ultimately help the business. That's the piece that doesn't make sense.
To help the business, and like that business was about helping people.
Yes.
It was about therapy for people. I'm trying to make this better. And it's okay if we disagree. You could say like, oh, I don't think that's going to work. This is why it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
I'm fine with that. But to just be upset and then punish me because I said something could be better, that's problematic.
Yeah.
That's problematic.
Indeed. Oh, thank you for sharing that story because, a lot of times it's interesting to find out, what really pushes you to, to inspire you. Yes, the why is there, but there are also experiences that people can relate to.
Sure.
And you don't want anyone else to go through that kind of thing. It's just, I feel the same way when I'm coaching people. It's I've been there, so I kind of coach and mentor.
Yes.
Coaching's about asking and mentoring's telling. So sometimes I have to tell people, sometimes I need to ask.
Yes.
But I think it goes in alignment with the relatable experiences, the experiences that you can bring to the table that everyone can connect with.
Yeah, no, that's really true. And I think, all these years later, I now have been in all those roles, right? So I've been the employee before, I've been the manager before, I've been I'm boss. I'm where it ends with me.
Yes.
All of those roles. And I think the beauty, and I truly mean it in that word beauty, the beauty of that is that I see so many different angles.
Yes.
I see so many different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
I have had and felt different feelings based on the role. And it changes of like what is needed.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is the piece that I want to like piggyback on, since you've had all the different roles. You've been at the bottom and now you're at the top. What are some tips let's go from the beginning. Like, what are some tips for employees who are in situations, maybe experiencing, because that story is not something that is never happened in the world, but what do you tell, what advice could you give our listeners about employees who may be in that situation where they're individual contributors or, not team leaders at this point? How did you work through that experience, or how would they gain some agency in creating a psychologically safe workplace?
Ooh. That's not what I thought you were going to end the question with. So I need to think about it. That's a really good question. So I think when it comes to being an individual contributor and your role in creating psychological safety, I do think it's about so let me step back if I could.
Okay.
Back, and then I want to kind of go back to your question.
Absolutely.
So I actually created a framework of how we can practice psychological safety. And so I think depending on the levels is how you might do it. But overall, I think it's important for everybody within an organization to use my BRAVE framework, right? And so BRAVE, so B is for bridging, R is respectful communication, A is for appropriate and authentic apologies, V is for virtue, and then E is for empathy.
Oh,
and
nice.
So if we can hit all of these key points, regardless of our role, then we're all working together to create psychological safety. So as an individual contributor, the piece of bridging, you're going to know your feelings. You're going to have your reactions. Those are so valid, and have them. Be thoughtful about who you share them with. So, I said in my story, like, I kept it, there was not drama. I would not encourage that. Like, you keep that to yourself. Right? But you kind of know how you're feeling about the situation. Talk it out with a trusted friend or colleague. But then also take the perspective of the other, right? That's the bridging, the perspective.
Yes.
And that is a hard thing to do when you're in the middle of it, right?
Yes, because you're feeling all the emotions.
And it's not to ignore the emotions. Like, have your feelings. That is so important. Have your feelings, know your feelings, appropriately manage them so they don't come out sideways and they don't ultimately cause you harm. Because it might feel good to yell at somebody in the moment. That might feel great. But the next moment is going to probably feel worse.
Yes.
How that's going to hurt your career. Right?
Yeah. It looks good on reality television, but not in real life.
Not in life at all. But then when you give yourself some space for that, then really try to think about the other person's perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Try to understand where they're coming from. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. But if you can understand it, it is easier then to have respectful communication with them. Because then you can go back and say, when you said this, you can even say, like, I didn't like it, or I was angry. This is why. You can have a conversation about it if you choose to. But you also could say, like, but I wanted to ask you some more questions about what you said, because I've been thinking about it, or it's not sitting right with me because this is how I heard it. I'm not sure if that's how you meant it, right? So you want to be able to go back and engage in the conversation.
Right.
And then if, it's great when apologies happen, but you're not always going to get an apology.
Right.
But you can also practice being virtuous and being honest and saying, this is what I was thinking. Not brutal honesty with kindness.
Yes.
And with empathy, right? So you kind of caring for your own emotions, but recognizing this person is human too.
Yeah.
And kind of trying to understand where they're coming from.
And that's where that bridging comes into play again. It's
exactly.
I really appreciate you walking, our listeners through that, because it's when emotions are high and your self-awareness, your self-management, all those emotional intelligence things that we talk about, it goes out the window, and all you see is either white or black or red or whatever it is. I think it's great to walk through those steps, and really it'll help you cool down a little bit. And I liked the piece. I wanted to really hang a nice little gold star on the trusted advisor, people that you trust to share that information with, because there are times where you might be sharing something with somebody who may go back and, be the town crier and sabotage the intentions of what you're trying to achieve and creating a psychologically safe workplace.
I'm so glad you brought that back up, Joyel, especially if we're talking for people who are early in their career.
Mm-hmm.
There's this way, especially when you're early in your career, you're just coming out of college or grad school, which is very communal, like friendly feelings. And so it's easy to go into the workplace and continue that, but not everybody is coming from that perspective. Right. And so you're absolutely right. You might have people at work that you love having lunch with and you love talking about reality shows with, right? Like you love connecting with them.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily translate to them being a trusted advisor.
Right.
So if you're at the beginning of your career, I actually would recommend that you have these conversations about your concerns with people outside of work.
Yes.
Until you know who are the trusted advisors within your workplace.
Indeed. I appreciate it.
Do it outside of work.
Thank you. Thank you for that public service announcement. Because it was so important. You can really do some major damage early on by sharing information with the wrong people.
Damage in a way that you won't know.
No.
They're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you that there's an opportunity that it just decided not to tell you about. Like, you're not going to know how it's going to alter your career. So just to be safe, take it outside.
Yes. Yeah. When in doubt, talk it out. Out of the office. Excellent. So what do you have? What kind of tips and techniques or approaches can you apply the BRAVE framework for leaders, people leaders? Because we've been there, done that, got the T-shirt. Now we've got a team, and we want to create a psychologically safe workplace. How do we apply the BRAVE framework in that situation?
So first, I just want to say, because whenever I talk with people managers, I always say, like, you have the hardest job. I think people management is one of the hardest jobs, because you're often promoted into people management because you're an exceptional individual contributor.
Mm-hmm.
Skill sets needed for people management are not the same as the skill sets needed for an individual contributor. Yet, we often don't get the training that is needed.
And that's where I come in.
Yes, exactly. Right. That's why they hire consultants.
Right.
Because they need more support and training. So I just want to kind of start with that.
Yes.
And I also want to say that for people managers, oh my gosh, so much power that they don't realize they have because they haven't been trained. And so when you have power that you don't realize you have, it's very easy to be careless with it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so emotional intelligence is a huge piece of this, along with the BRAVE framework of knowing how you're responding to people so that you can catch your own emotions.
Yes.
And you can check the thoughts that are coming to your mind so that you don't act on them. So if somebody on your team misses a deadline, makes a mistake, whatever it is, it could be really easy to be angry, irritated, annoyed, and then decide you're just not going to give them another chance. That's not right.
Yeah, not good.
It doesn't give psychological safety. We're going to make mistakes.
Yes.
Things are going to be missed. We're human.
Yeah.
But how we recover from it, you know what I mean?
Yes.
As a manager, how are you bridging? How are you taking the perspective of your employee? How are you talking to them about the mistake that was made? And can you do it from a place of curiosity rather than shaming and judgment? Which is a quick sidebar. I'll say most of us manage and lead as we've seen done to us before.
Yes.
So if we're not intentional, we might do things that we might not actually want to do. We might not think that we're shaming somebody.
Right.
Or judgmental, but we could be if we're not really thoughtful of, hey, I saw you miss this deadline. Can you tell me what happened? Is very different than, I can't believe you missed this deadline. We talked about it. You know how important this was. Like, those are very different responses.
Yes.
Right? And then to apologize as a manager.
Ooh, it's a big one.
It takes, I think, a lot of security and vulnerability to say that you were wrong. Or you can also apologize. You might not necessarily have been wrong, but to recognize that you caused harm.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And to be able to apologize for that. Even if you don't, even if it wasn't your experience.
Right. That's that part. Yeah. That's the piece, you know, like it's really hard to respond with empathy.
Yes.
When you haven't experienced it yourself. And that is a key piece. It's just it's such an enriching thing to do when you can do that. It like you said, it bridges, it builds the bridge instead of burning it down. And then that person trusts you. They feel safe. They feel confident that they can come to you and talk to you about anything. But that piece right there, even if you haven't experienced it.
And I
get it.
I want to, if I could, because I'm so glad you opened this up. When you're managing people with different experiences than you have, whether it is educational background, race, gender, religion, ability, right?
Yep.
When you're managing a diverse group of people, if you only apply your lens, you're going to miss so much. And so if somebody on your team, for example, comes to you and says, I know you wanted me to follow up with John. They're not returning my messages. I don't know what to do next. So as the manager, the idea could be like, well, maybe they're not actually following up with John, or maybe John's really busy, or maybe there's something else going on that you don't know about because you've always had great experiences with John.
Right.
So maybe you actually believe the person saying, I'm having trouble connecting with them, even though that hasn't been your experience. Right. So just allowing people to have different experiences, even if it's not your truth.
That like, I feel like we need to like put that on repeat. We'll just have to repeat that over and over again because it is so important to lead that way. And that really helps build the inclusive, psychologically safe workplace. To see things from a different perspective, because it's very easy to be like, oh, John, that's just how John is with you. With you.
Yeah. You know, I could just be like, just even more kind of demonstrative and just clearer. because I've done this before. I was leading facilitating a training with a group of managers, and there's a white male manager, people manager, and we were talking about. He's like, yeah, I can share my experience of what's worked with me to be successful in this company to get promoted. And I asked, like, can I challenge you on that? Can I, and he was so receptive to hearing that people who are not white men, and the company was heavily white men, right? So if you were not a man or you're not white, like, you were significantly in the minority group. I said, people who aren't white men might not have the same type of success you had doing what you did, because they will be perceived differently than you. And so, a different way to consider it is, can you share all of your lessons learned with somebody on your team who has a different experience, different identities than you, and then ask them for their feedback of, like, I know that this has worked for me. How would this work for you as a woman? How would this work for you as a Latina? How would this work for, right?
Right.
You were and then you have a conversation, because what that does oh my gosh, what that does is so great.
It's so rich.
It's so significant. It's telling the person on your team that you see and understand that they have different experiences, even if you don't understand them.
Right.
It's opening the door to conversation to help grow their career.
Yes.
Giving them your gems and asking them to refine it, change it to fit them, so that it can actually work for them. And then again, as the manager, I said, now can you lend your privilege by opening those doors for those people?
Right.
Now, perhaps John would answer emails quicker if you were on the email.
Right.
So maybe from the beginning, you say, hey, I want you to follow up with John. Why don't you send the first email and copy me on it? And then you can take it from there.
Absolutely. It's sponsorship at its core. I talk about that in my book all the time. It's like a NASCAR car, all those labels and advertisements, those are sponsors. So you need to be one of those labels on the car. Yeah. So we can see visibly that, you've got their back.
We're seeing that.
Yeah. So absolutely. I love it. I have the chills just talking about all this. I'm geeking out.
I love it.
So I do want to make sure that we get through a few more questions. I wanted to know if you had any myths that you wanted to bust about the work that you do. Like, I think there's sometimes people assume that if you're in social work, I don't know, whatever myths that are out there. I know that the myth that my mom was an LCS, what is it? LCSW?
Yeah.
LCSW. I'm like mixing up the letters, but she was a licensed social worker. There we go. I'll just say it that way. For 40 years. And the myth was that she was always working in nonprofit. Like, she was never able to, make any means. So what are some myths that you may struggle with that you want to debunk with our listeners?
Oh, well, I think that's true. What your mom said. And I have to say, I remember even when I was working in nonprofits, one of the things I love about my degree is how flexible it is. And so I think that people don't always realize, my credentials help me understand people's behaviors and motivations. And so when we're talking about the workplace, like, it's not skill set that's the issue. It's not technical skills. People can do that.
Right.
It's how we talk to each other or don't talk to each other that causes problems, right? Yeah. And so that is something that I'm really good at, but people might see my degree and not recognize how it translates to the workspace. So I would say that's one myth about my kind of my background. I would say another myth about the industry in general. When I say industry, I mean workplace wellness. That it's a nice to have.
Yeah.
That it's just an add-on. And it's not really It's not a necessity. And I would also say another myth is that it's for people who are probably earlier in their careers. And I think people often overlook how crucial it is for people in the middle, toward end of career, even.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, it is more poignant and relevant for them because the workplace has changed.
It has. Yes.
It has changed so much. So people entering the workforce, having them trained on emotional intelligence and how to talk to people is necessary.
Yes. But
they don't have an old way of doing it. So you bring them in and they'll learn what you tell them to do.
They're a sponge, yes.
But people who are in their mid to end of career have been doing it a certain way of telling people what to do and expecting them to do it. That's not how people are working anymore.
Right.
And so I think the myth that this is information is only for early career professionals is a huge myth and a miss.
Myth and miss.
Yes.
I love that. I might change. I might even change that question around. Yes, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have one more question that I ask all of my guests, and it's if you could share one career or leadership piece of advice, and it could be around psychological safety or it could be around general career. What would you share with your younger self? Like, what would be that one piece of advice that you would tell little Tonya?
I love that question. Joyel. I think what I would say is you will find your work people, but it may not be where you work. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
You will find your work people, but it might not be where you work.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier about trusted advisors.
Mm-hmm.
Not always in the company where you're working.
Right.
We're not going to get all of our needs met from one organization, just like we don't get all our needs met from one relationship, right? And so I think if earlier on I had realized, like, oh, I'm not going to get everything I want out of this job. I'm not going to get all of the support that I might want or need out of this job. So I need to look elsewhere, which will allow me to thrive in this job for as long as it's possible, right?
Right.
You also need to know when to leave.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to get everything from one place, your tenure is going to be shorter.
Indeed. Indeed. Oh, such gems. Such gems. Thank you so, so much for just sharing all of this wonderful advice and asking you to take a look at your career view past so that others can pave their career futures. Tonya Ladipo, thank you so much for being here on this podcast. And where can we find you? Where can we find more information about you?
Yeah, go to our website, theladipogroup.com. It's all about the services that we do, the work we do with organizations. You can also sign up for our weekly newsletter to learn more about psychological safety and emotional intelligence.
Thank you so much for your time. And thank you all for watching and listening, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much for listening to Career View Mirror. If you got value from this episode, please consider leaving a rating and review for the show on Apple Podcasts, or head on over to Spotify and click 5 stars for our show. We also have a YouTube channel with video versions of our episodes, so subscribe over there for more content. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next episode.